Rome existed for a long time prior to its empire phase. It had kings from around 750 BC and then transitioned to a republic shortly before 500 BC. The republic phase brings us to a couple of decades before the year zero. Over the ensuing hundreds of years, the Roman Empire would see great heights as well as times when its future was gravely threatened. Sometimes ruled by competent emperors, and at other times by cruel, chaotic, and even crazy emperors, the story of the Roman Empire is a wild one. While we'll constrain our focus on the period ending with the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, continues the Roman story for nearly a millennium beyond. We enter the scene shortly after Julius Caesar's heir, Octavian, had come out the victor in the battles for control of the empire against a man who'd earlier been a general for Julius Caesar, Mark Antony. With the war against Mark Antony behind him, in 27 BC, Octavian formally returned his power to the Senate and the Roman people. This was a mere formality, however, largely serving propagandistic purposes, while Octavian retained control over almost the entire military and held significant political power besides. He held the power, but not the title, of a number of magistracies. While Octavian would profusely protest the notion, in the eyes of many historians, it's in 27 BC that Rome enters its empire period. During the reign of Octavian Augustus, the great poets Horace, Ovid, and Virgil were active. Ovid got on the wrong side of Augustus with his semi-amoral art of love and was banished. To succeed the emperorship, Augustus chose his stepson, Tiberius, whom he adopted as his son and married off to his daughter. In 14 CE, upon Augustus's natural death, the 54-year-old Tiberius became emperor. Tiberius turned out to be a thrifty emperor who accrued much wealth for the Roman treasury, but whose standoffish nature had him not having good relations with people. After Tiberius phased into semi-retirement in 26 CE, the Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, who already held great power, was left in charge. Sejanus soon plotted against Agrippina the Elder and her son Gaius, better known by his nickname Caligula, and Sejanus was executed. When Tiberius died in 37 CE, he left both Caligula and Gemellus as co-heirs, but the 25-year-old Caligula, aided by the Praetorian prefect, asserted sole power. While he didn't enter office a particularly vicious man, upon recovering from an illness early on, he manifested a cruel despotism. It would take only a couple of years before Caligula was assassinated in 41 CE, but not before he managed to spend wildly, depleting the treasury accrued under Tiberius, and then some. In place of Caligula, the Praetorian Guard placed Caligula's uncle, the physically disabled Claudius, atop the Roman Empire. Claudius was a scholarly man, and he wrote many works. Under his rule, Senate membership was opened to Romanized provincial elites. Militarily, Thrace and southern British kingdoms were added to the empire. Conquest farther north into Britain would continue over the ensuing decades. Agrippina the Younger, Claudius's wife, poisons him in 54 CE, and her son from a prior marriage, the 16-year-old Nero, ascends to the emperorship. Nero grew into a full-born man soon enough, and in 59 CE, he had his mother executed over an alleged conspiracy, and in 62 CE, Praetorian prefect Burrus dies, or is perhaps poisoned, and Nero's tutor, Seneca, is made to kill himself in 65 CE. Nero, as emperor, is famed for his cruelty and self-glorification. He also had to contend with a couple of rebellions. During Nero's time at the top, Britain and Judea rebelled. Sent to quell the Judean rebellion is Vespasian, who'd soon rise to the emperorship. After a major fire went down in Rome in 64 CE, Nero aided in the recovery and blamed and persecuted the Christians for it. Frustrations with Nero's rule mounted across time, and in the face of a rebellion, Nero killed himself in 68 CE. Now came 3 emperors in quick succession. Galba is declared emperor and assassinated. Otho ascends to his place in 69 CE and then loses in war to Vitellius in that same year, and Vitellius is the next emperor. But in the east, the Roman legions in Egypt, Judea, and Syria acclaim Vespasian as emperor, and he marches on Vitellius and defeats his forces. Vespasian is now emperor and would hold the position for the ensuing decade. Back in Judea, the rebels fell to Vespasian's son Titus in 70 CE, with some holdouts remaining until the collective suicide at Masada. Vespasian would go on to rule until 79 CE before dying of an illness. His great architectural accomplishment, the Flavian Amphitheater, was unfinished at the time, and the finishing touches were implemented by his successor Titus. And the Flavian Amphitheater, along with the adjacent baths of Titus, were opened up in 80 CE. Titus's rule was short-lived, as after falling ill, he died in 81 CE. His younger brother, Domitian, followed on as the next emperor. Domitian had a streak of self-grandiosity, but would manage to rule for a fair length before he was assassinated in 96 CE. Now the Senate nominated Nerva to be emperor, and he ruled until 98 CE when he died. With the death of Nerva, a new style of more steadily competent Roman emperors sat at the helm. In an effort to stabilize the heirship to the Roman emperorship through providing competent adult rulers as the empire's heirs, Nerva had taken on the then 44-year-old Trajan as his adopted son. Trajan took over after Nerva's death in 98 CE, and Trajan added to the empire Dacia, Arabia, Armenia, and parts of Mesopotamia. Like Nerva, Trajan adopted a competent adult, Hadrian, as his son and successor, and upon Trajan's 117 death from illness, Hadrian took the empire's reins. Hadrian rebuilt the Pantheon and adopted as his son and successor Aurelius Antoninus. Hadrian had Antoninus adopt Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. Antoninus followed Hadrian as emperor after Hadrian's 138 CE death. Under Antoninus's rule, the empire ran fairly smoothly, and Scotland was brought under Roman control. Antoninus died in 161 CE, leaving as co-emperors his two adopted sons. Both co-emperors led armies against Rome's enemies. Verus responded to a Parthian invasion with an invasion of his own that ended up sacking the Parthian capital. All was not okay, however, as his troops brought back with them disease that ravaged millions of the Roman populace. Marcus Aurelius was involved up north, where he oversaw the Marcomannic Wars against the various tribes. During this venture, Aurelius recorded some of his reflections, which come down to us as the Meditations. Eventually, the Column of Marcus Aurelius would be constructed to commemorate those northern wars. Verus would precede Aurelius in death by just over a decade, dying in 169 CE, with Aurelius passing in 180 CE. The series of capable emperors now ended, with Aurelius opting not to adopt a capable successor, and instead leaving the empire in the hands of his son, Commodus. Commodus was a megalomaniac, and like Nero, he fancied himself a great athletic competitor. He also deemed himself a reincarnation of Hercules. After Commodus was assassinated in 192 CE, Pertinax was made emperor, and he's assassinated in March 193 CE. The Praetorian Guard then sells the emperorship to Didius Julianus, who is assassinated just over 2 months later. 3 generals all claim the emperorship in the wake of Julianus: Clodius Albinus in Britain, Pisenius Niger in the east, and Septimius Severus on the Danube. Severus takes over at Rome, and in 195 CE submits Niger's army. Albinus's forces soon fell to Severus's in 197 CE, freeing Severus up to shift his sights outward, which he did with a turn east to Parthia. After realizing some success against Parthia, Severus added the province of Mesopotamia to the Roman Empire. He later campaigned in Britain, where he died in 211 CE. Following Severus were Caracalla and Geta as co-emperors, but Caracalla had Geta killed and ruled on his own from there on. Caracalla campaigned in the north, but then turned east against Parthia without much success. Macrinus brings about the assassination of Caracalla in 217 CE and takes over as the new emperor. Macrinus himself was assassinated in 218, upon which Elagabalus took over. Elagabalus proved to be a fairly crazy and unpleasant emperor, making numerous erratic, out-of-left-field decisions and appointments. He wasn't long for the world either, and was assassinated by the Praetorian Guard in 222 CE. The Senate hated him so much that they had his memory damned and his body greatly disrespected before being disposed of in the Tiber River. Now came the rule of Emperor Severus Alexander. During Alexander's reign, Artasher I overthrew the Parthian Empire and founded the Sasanian dynasty. Battle between the Roman and Sasanian empires came in 231 with inconclusive results. After Germanic tribes invaded in the north, Severus paid them off rather than engage in battle, but in 235, new problems arose in the north with the legions under General Maximinus rebelling. This rebellion is successful, and Maximinus becomes the next emperor. Maximinus realizes success in battle against the northern Germanic tribes and positions himself as a pro-army, anti-Senate emperor. The Senate, in an attempt to overthrow Maximinus, promoted Gordian I and Gordian II as co-emperors in 238 CE. After Gordian II died in battle, Gordian I killed himself. Next came the co-emperors Balbinus and Pupienus. Maximinus marches on Rome and is assassinated midway. Balbinus and Pupienus are assassinated by the Praetorian Guard, who declare the young teenager Gordian III as the emperor. Gordian III survived the wild year of 238 CE and then some, dying in 244 CE after the empire had recaptured some of the land lost to the Sasanians. Over the coming decades, many emperors came and went. Civil wars were a regularity as rival claimants duked it out, and invasions in the north by barbarian tribes wrought further chaos upon the failing empire. Further invasions came from the Sasanian Empire, who reached into Syria and Turkey. Eventually, the lack of primacy of a single or even joint emperors had local rulers staking out kingdoms of their own, and the empire fractured. Around 260 CE, the Gallic Empire announced itself in the west, while the Palmyrene Empire ruled in the east. A hint of respite came with the ascension of Aurelian to the emperorship in 270. Before being assassinated in 275 CE, Aurelian withdrew Roman troops in the north to the Danube, making the northern front more defensible, and he brought the Gallic and Palmyrene empires back under Roman rule. Aurelian is also notable for his worship of Sol Invictus, a god whose power veers somewhat towards monotheism relative to the more common and traditional religious perspectives, and this powerful god, Sol Invictus, would be believed in by Constantine prior to his famed conversion to Christianity. Stagnation set in once again after Aurelian's rule, but in 284 CE, a new emperor turned things around. In 284, Diocletian assumed power. Diocletian, in the face of such a large empire requiring effective rule, introduced the Tetrarchy. First, he split the running of the empire into eastern and western halves, with himself ruling out of the east and his but junior emperor ruling out of the west. Beyond Diocletian and his co-emperor Maximian, in the 290s there were added two lower-tier emperors, Galerius as Caesar for Maximian and Constantius as Caesar to Diocletian. Diocletian thereby made the entire empire more manageable and also introduced lines of succession with the lower-tier emperors set to replace their higher-tier counterparts upon their deaths. He also introduced other reforms to bring the empire under more effective rule. Diocletian also proved to be one of those rare rulers who gave up power before his life's end. Diocletian abdicated the emperorship in 305 CE, and Maximian became senior emperor. But competition soon rearose, and one of the emperors, Constantine, would end up on top. He won the Battle of Milvian Bridge against Maxentius in 312, and then turned on his erstwhile ally Licinius by invading Licinius's Eastern Roman Empire and defeating him in 323 CE. Constantine, who'd converted to Christianity shortly more than a decade prior, was now sole ruler of the Roman Empire. He took an interest in religious issues, convening a council at Nicaea in 325, which resolved the Arian argument in favor of a non-hierarchical trinity. He also had Constantinople built up in the image of Rome as his new capital, with the city being formally dedicated in 330 CE. He utilized the new capital until his death in 337. After Constantine's death, the empire quickly returned to multiple rulers. After some contention, 3 of Constantine's sons managed to divide the empire between themselves, but by 353, one son, Constantius II, was the only one remaining, and he chose Gallus as co-emperor. He soon killed Gallus and put Julian in power in 355 to rule in the west. Julian's forces declared him full emperor, and before conflict between the two emperors were realized, Constantius II died and Julian remained as sole emperor. He comes out as pagan, proving to be the last non-Christian Roman emperor, but he died in 363 CE, and the empire returned to Eastern and Western emperors. While the Eastern Empire would go on for more than another 1,000 years, the western half of the Roman Empire was nearing its end. In 378 CE, the Eastern Emperor Valens lost against the Goths in the major battle of Adrianople. His successor, Theodosius, defeated the allegedly soft on paganism Eugenius at the Battle of the Frigidus River. Theodosius then banned paganism from the empire. In 410, the Visigoth warlord Alaric marched on and looted Rome. Barbarians were soon taking over and making themselves at home in the Western Roman Empire. Carthage fell to the Vandals in 439 CE. The Huns invaded the west in the 450s, but after meeting with the Pope, Attila withdrew and soon died. Without his leadership, the Huns fell apart into fractious tribes. In 455 CE, the Vandals intensively sacked Rome. The Western Roman Empire was no longer much of an empire, but the last emperor, in name only, Romulus Augustulus, was finally deposed in 476 CE by Odoacer. Rome, whose empire had already been non-existent, now had no claimant to the lineage of the emperorship remaining in the West. With the Western Roman Empire having fallen, the Roman story continued in the East. Christian emperors would rule the Byzantine Empire, so named for the earlier name of the empire's capital, Byzantium, which had been built up and rechristened Constantinople under the first Christian emperor, Constantine. The eastern half of the empire, well urbanized and wealthier than the western half, would last for around another 1,000 years before it too fell and history carried on, apathetic to yet another, among a dizzying array of empires, fallen empire. Rome's imprint would be left on the world in many ways, however, and in that sense, her culture has yet to take its final breath.